and we said that all the nitzotzos came to him. Right?
Oh, it started working?
We'll see how it goes. He says it's going to go off.
I guess we'll be back.
All the nitzotzos came to him. So this represented the ultimate padiyah b'shalom, because he represented something which was, so to speak, beyond dealing with the world. In other words, Moshe, who also was an Inyan of malamai lamata, from above to below, which means when he came to the klippas, they nullified themselves automatically. He didn't have to get involved in investing into them. Nonetheless, since he had to go into their land and into their place of the enemy, they were tofes makom. They took up place in his mind, and therefore he was not able to wipe them out through and through. Whereas Shlomo stayed in his place, so that represented a level which is completely beyond the realm of the klippas, and therefore Kiviyachol, he was able to nullify them through and through. And what does that represent in Olamos, in spirituality there? He represented Atik, which truly is beyond the world. Because Tzedakah, including Keser, is already something for the sake of the world, i.e. that does recognize the place of the world. Because it's part of the world, it was just taken away and given back. But Atik is completely beyond the world. It's like the sixth partsuf. And therefore, since Shlomo was wielding that, he stayed in his place. He didn't even consider the world. So far, that's what we said. But then we sort of snuck in there that there's this other level, which Shlomo actually represents, which is that even though you're in your place, you could still be considering the worlds outside of you. That he didn't descend into the place of the enemy. No. But there's like this intermediary thing where you could still consider the realms of the enemy, even though you don't descend into their place. So it's not completely beyond the worlds. And then therefore we introduced yet a higher level than Atik, which is Panimius Atik, right? The inner, which is now going to be the third level of the Keser. So you have Arich, which is Shaykh to the worlds, Atik, which represents Shlomo, it's beyond the worlds, but somehow still has the worlds in mind. And then Panimius Atik, which is what we call the Yeshod lo Yada, the unknowable head. And going into the unknowable head conversation, we launched into a whole shiluv of a conversation between the Zohar and Reb Chaim Vital, basically, where he starts to explain a little bit about what's going on with these three heads. And he says that the three heads are basically the way that the Ein Sof is Nisalem, hides itself inside of these three heads. And the Ein Sof distributes itself, hides itself into these three heads in three different levels of expression of itself. And that's what the three levels of the Keser are. And the Iker place that it really resides is in the Reish lo Yada, the unknowable highest third head. And he used three words, Reb Chaim Vital, to describe the process of it coming down through these three heads: Nimtza, Nisalam, and Nisgale. And we said in the first head, the unknowable head, it's Nimtza, it's found. And the connotation there is that it's found exactly as it is in the Ein Sof itself. It's like the Ein Sof basically just distributes itself, its full essence, into that first head. And then Nisalem and Nisgale it then hides itself and reveals itself. He didn't go into the details there, but it represents the two levels of light. That already those lower two levels of heads are levels of revelation, whereas the first one is the essence itself. And so basically, he said that this is akin to what we talk about, Atahu Hashem. Shaul, that's where you come in. Atahu Hashem.
Now I'm here.
Ata means you, is basically referring to the essence itself, and that is the highest unknowable head. He, Atahu, who is he, is already representing the level what we were calling Atik, Shlomo's level. And Havaya, Yud Vav Kei, is already, which is a level of light, and Havaya is also a level of light, a lower level of light, which is Havaya. Atahu Hashem. In the parlance of Chassidus, we don't call it Nimtza, Nisalam, and Nisgale. We call it Atahu Havaya. And basically, what we're saying is that in the days of Shlomo, he was still dealing with Giluim. He was still dealing with light. Even though he was dealing with the second head, so he was holding by the level of Atik, that's not the ultimate place where the Ein Sof resides. It's really in the unknowable head, which will be found in the days of Mashiach. And that's what we got up to. Does anyone have any questions on that?
Yes.
Okay.
Did we say for a moment that there were four?
Four levels. Ein Sof being above the whole thing.
Ein Sof is the one above the whole thing.
And then the Ein Sof is what's distributing. It's the Ein Sof that's found or concealed or revealed in those three lower levels. So the fact that it's found in the highest one means it's identical to how it actually is how it comes down into the first level, Yeshod Lo Yada.
So Erech Anpin is the external one.
Yeah.
Atik Yomin is the internal one.
Yeah.
And then Atik, the normal Atik, which is Yeshod Lo Yada.
Yeah.
Is what?
Is the highest one, the third head. Levi, come home.
Is the highest one.
Don't let him bother you. Yeah.
Oh, and then after that it's just
Ein Sof.
it's just Ein Sof.
Remember, we're talking about the three levels of Kesser. So even though it's like all this high stuff, at the end of the day, it's still like a sphera,
Right. Wow.
right? Whereas beyond the spheres, there's just Hashem.
Right. And right.
But what we're saying is that there is this point. This is kind of like this wondrous thing. There is a point that even there's a sphera whose job it is to reveal the essence of God. It's not even light. Most of the time, talking about sphera, the word sphera even itself comes from the word sapir, which means a sapphire, means to be brilliant, light. Usually, spheros, there's an Indian of light in them. But this one sphera, the third crown of Kesser, the unknowable head, it doesn't have any. It's not an Indian of light. It's an Indian of essence. Somehow the essence transfers itself to this point of the highest level of the sphera, because if it's not somehow coming out, then it's not sharing itself.
Right.
But usually when it comes out, it has to dim itself down and become light, as opposed to essence. It's a funny thing to say that it dims itself down by becoming light, but that's what happens. It hides itself in the form of light.
Right.
But this one point of Yeshod Lo Yada, it just comes out as it is, in a sphera, but nonetheless there's no thing to that sphera other than Ein Sof being found there.
If it's unknowable, and how do people know about it?
If it's unknowable, that's where the Arizal comes in, I guess. He explains the unknowable. Copies, we made 5 yesterday. Now, where did those go off to? Anyone have a copy? Do you know where they are? Oh, there's another book. There's a book right in front of you there. On the yeah. Yep. Page Nun Gimel. Okay, so we'll go on in the mimer. Does everyone understand basically what's happening? Okay, Yud Aleph. Umavar ba'mimer. Again, the Rabbi Rashab explains in his mimer. The al yadei shalasi lavo tiyam shacham penimius atik. That since in the future there will be a unleashing of this penimius atik, Ein Sof shebereis de lo yada, which is the Ein Sof mamash in this third head. Shlomo, which is higher than what came out in the days of Shlomo. So therefore there's also a reciprocal concept that it will be drawn down lower. In other words, because it comes from a higher place, it will actually permeate lower, as we always say. And you might say, how much lower could it permeate? Because Shlomo had perfect world peace. But there was obviously, it wasn't Mashiach, so there's yet one level to go. As it's brought in the Eitz Chaim, written here in the holy city of Sfas. Okay, this is also a little tricky piece. When it comes to the Aliyah of Malchus, there's 7 levels. What is, first of all, the Aliyah of Malchus? So on a very simple level, Malchus represents the idea of godliness that has become worldliness, right? Malchus is a kingdom. However, it's a sphere of God. So basically, it's like divinity that minimizes itself into what is able to fit into the world and basically is the source of the world. But it goes up. It has an aliyah, which means basically, even though Hashem sort of contracted himself into something finite, that very sphere of Malchus can have many aliyahs, in which case it sort of nullifies itself back into oneness. The process of Yom Kippur, let's say, is like it's the Aliyah Sa'olamos, or Shabbos in general. The world sort of goes up a level and certain contractions are removed from it. Like we say, Vayachal Elokim, Bayom HaShvi'i, right? It says, Vayachal Elokim means Elokim stopped on the 7th day. And that's the idea that the minimization of godliness that happens throughout the weekdays sort of dissipates on Shabbos, and the world is just a more refined, godly place. Then you have Shabbat, Shabbaton, Yom Kippur. That happens at a much even greater level. And the idea is that malchus is rising up and becoming more godly. So in general, there are 7 levels that it can rise up in total until it goes back into its source as oneness. And he says, B'yemei Shlomo has some madrigas havav. Shlomo got it to the 6th level. Which kind of, I'm not saying, the Rabbi doesn't say this exactly, but it does make sense to what we said about the 6 partsufim, right? Because we said there were 6 partsufim. If you add atik, right, and Shlomo got it to there. So basically, he took it all the way from malchus to zah, to bina, to chokhmah, to keser, to atik. And basically, he rose up malchus into this place which is truly beyond the worlds. Therefore, inside of the world was something beyond the world. Made the world rich. But that's all. He stopped at vav. Whereas in the future, it will be the 7th level will be reached. Dor hashvi. So what's the difference between the 6th level and the 7th level? The madregas havav. The 6th level, hagiloi b'malchus hu rak b'tes sfiros sheba, v'ad l'bechinas yeshod sheba. So basically, what he's saying is that when the malchus rises up all 6 levels, the revelation that is permeating it only affects the 9 spheros of malchus, all the way down to yeshod, which is the 9th sphera from above to below. Okay, but in other words, it leaves as a tiny aspect of malchus of malchus. It leaves it unaffected by this revelation. Right? It's like the feet are not drowning in this light. Everything else except for the bottom level of the world gets the effect of the aliyah, but not malchus of malchus. Only the 9 spheres within malchus, they're all permeated with this aliyah, but not the bottom one.
In which moment is this?
This is when it goes up to the 6th level of elevation. It's able to affect almost the totality of malchus and like drown it in this divinity. But the lowest level of malchus is unaffected by this aliyah.
This is Shlomo Melech's?
Yeah, this is Shlomo's level. Yeah, the 6th level.
What? So the first level, what was the first level?
He doesn't go into the 1st level, but we're basically saying that there's the malchus represents the world, right? Its aliyah represents going up into higher levels of divinity.
Okay. So
you could say the first. I mean, I'm not necessarily sure exactly. You have to look into the Eitz Chaim, but according to what we were saying, at least, just like on a amateur level here of taking a guess, is that it's talking about the partsufim, right? So there's the partsuf of malchus, zah, bina, or ima, abba, and keser. So, but remember we talked about before. There's even when you get to, we talked about in the beginning the mimer, that if Hashem took away all the partsufim, then there wouldn't even be a world. He left malchus of malchus. When he took away when it says ata asisa es shamayim, and the word ata is without a hey, that whole conversation that we had earlier. Yeah. So he took away 5 partsufim, malchus, zah, abba, ima, and keser. So what's left? So there was like the kli that all those lights were sitting in. That's what was left. You follow me?
Yeah.
That's called malchus of malchus. That's just like the basic world, right, without any light in it at all.
Right.
So that is what Hashem, so to speak, left there. And then when it has an aliyah, it goes, that basic world goes up in levels. First it goes to regular malchus. It's like experiencing the lowest level of divinity, which is like panemius malchus. And then it goes to the next level, which is zah. The next level, which is ima, abba, keser. And then ultimately in the days of Shlomo, went up to the 6th aliyah, which was atik. You follow me?
Right.
So there's still something like, it's like the body and the soul. The soul can have an unbelievable level of elevation, but it's still in the same body, and the body basically is, in a certain sense, unchanged by the soul.
So the malchus of the world went to the highest level in that of Shlomo.
The 2nd highest level.
Second.
Right? And therefore, what happens when you reach the 2nd to the highest level? It leaves one aspect of the world below unaffected, which is basically the body. malkus of malkus. Like imagine if you're talk about body and soul for a second, right? Your soul can have unbelievable aliyahs. You can start to all of a sudden like experience tremendous emotions of God, one level. You can experience like unbridled intellect of the Creator, another level. You can start to experience like faith beyond capacity and trust, another level. But you're all in the same body. And even though you're having these experiences through the same body, the experiences are not necessarily affecting the body to make a change. The body is just a kli that all these experiences are happening inside of. So even when you get up to the highest level of Shlomo, you still basically you have the inner aspect of the world is going wild, but the gashmis of the world is just a kli holding this. It's not actually changed by this experience.
That would have went, we have nothing to hold us anymore, right?
Not necessarily. It could be that you'll affect that final level, but it doesn't mean it'll disappear. It means it'll turn into godliness. In the meantime, it was just being a kli for all this. It wasn't itself turned into godliness.
It's a change all the way up to the level of Atik. Atik is still a spira, still within the world. So then
It's still light.
still light, like within the Shtalshlus.
It's far from the Ishtalshalus, okay, because we said that, I mean, when it comes to the Ishtal, that's why it's called Atik. Atik means removed.
Right. But then
Ancient, primordial, before everything. But it's still light. It's still Or Ein Sof.
okay,
It's Giloyim as opposed to essence. So all the while that you haven't hit the essence yet, you also are not able to affect the root of the body. Because remember, the body comes from essence, not from light. The soul comes from light. The body comes from essence. So long as you're playing games with the soul's having a great old time, but it's not affecting the body.
right, so you will affect the body when Mashiach comes because we will have
Essence.
the nimtza, we will have
Right,
like
right.
the third head.
Go ahead, Israel.
I'm gonna have the fourth level. Sorry, last thing.
The fourth level is found in the third level. That's the idea.
Oh,
That's why it's called nimtza.
that's what it's called.
Just like it is.
Because the Atzmus is found there. Oh.
Yeah.
Whoa.
There were physical changes though, like the fact that there was no more wars going on throughout those 40 years, or that there's other stuff going on, no? Like
For sure, it affects the physical.
Physical miracles that were going on at that point.
Yeah, when your body is in possession, is possessed by like a soul on that level, it's gonna do and act like a soul.
It was for everyone, it wasn't just for Shlomo.
It was primarily for Shlomo, but you're right, he was able to bring that level into the whole world. But the point is again, even if you'll today affect your body in such a way that it's like you're doing everything right, it might just mean that you're dragging along a piece of flesh with you that's acting perfectly because the soul inside of it is doing right. It doesn't necessarily mean that your body on its own is a perfected being. It just means that it's glued to a perfect soul. So therefore, it is affected, and that's actually the next line that he's going to say. Let me just read the next line, and it's an answer to your question. Hagiloi b'malchus de malchus. Okay, there was a revelation of malchus, this lowest level. But haya al yedei shenichlala b'yesod sheba. How did it happen? Because the lowest level got included into the level of yesod. So there wasn't an actual effect on malchus of malchus, which we're calling the goof, but it was totally affected because it got sucked up into the yesod, which that level was directly affected by the elevation. And since the body was sort of drawn along with the yesod, it was totally changed. And as you said, the physical world was totally different then. But it was only affected because of what was happening to the soul, and it was sort of like dragged along with the soul.
Instead of like drawing
The revelation did not happen to malchus. It happened to yesod, and malchus was dragged along inside of yesod.
Wow.
They say that when a tzaddik passes away, his body doesn't decompose.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
So his body's affected by the...
It's true, but that's because there's a piece of soul left in his body.
Oh, okay.
It could also be because the tzaddik, maybe he reaches a certain level of Gan Eden, in other words, maybe he gets this level in his passing. Like it says by Moshe Rabbeinu, he was buried in Har Nevo, Nun Bo. So his whole life he didn't reach to the 50th level of Bina, but in his passing he did. In other words, they're not like done when they die. Maybe dafka in their passing is when their goof becomes totally refined in a new way that it wasn't in their life. And that, so maybe, I don't know exactly.
Well, brings in a mind right before Mashiach comes, when there's going to be, the resurrection of the dead. Even the tzaddikim's body is going to have to turn into dust for like a second.
Then he says, he says elsewhere there'll be bli hefsek.
That is later.
Okay. Anyway, let's get into things that we know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So, right, it's hard to say. But, so anyway, so it goes on that malkus of malkus, and was the lowest, was not affected from the sixth aliyah going up to Atik, except for the fact that it was included, so to speak, and dragged along with yeshod. Because again, what's yeshod doing there? When you go up the sixth level, the light is able to permeate all 9 spheres of malchus up until yesod, but not malchus of malchus. Choch of malchus, bin of malchus, up to yesod of malchus, and malchus of malchus gets affected because it's attached to the yesod, but the revelation is not to there itself. Umadrega hazayin, when it comes to the 7th level, going up finally to the 7th level, which would be to this Reish de lo Isyada, a noble head, Hagilehu gam b'malchus de malchus. That means that the effect of it is that it goes all the way down and does reach malchus of malchus. Kamosh shehi b'makomo, as it is in its place, not as it is schlepped along with yesod. So it knows as the principle always goes, the higher you go, the lower is your influence. So if you go up to the 7th level of elevation, you'll be able to actually bring godliness to the goof on the goof's own terms, as it were. Umamshich ba'maimer, and he explains in the Maimer, Shachiluk de beis aliyos de malchus, that the difference between the 2 elevations of malchus, aliyah havav, should be Yemei Shlomo, v'aliyah hazayin, shetiyah le'asid lavo, which is the 6th aliyah that was in the days of Shlomo, and the 7th that will be in the time to come. Hu gam benogel and yitzotzo shenaflu lamata. It also has everything to do with these sparks that fell below. In other words, how much of an aliyah, how high of a light you're bringing in, has an effect on your birurim, right? On how much you're refining the sparks that are trapped inside of the klippa, that are in the klippas.
Is this talking about the body itself, or?
It's going to, but in the meantime, it's talking about the sparks that are trapped inside the klippas. We said that Moshe, was able to affect them on a certain level. He was able to scatter them, but not destroy them. There was still the existence of enemies. Mm-hmm. And Shlomo was able to even destroy them, basically. So there was peace on earth. But we sort of threw in this idea that he had the world in mind some way. So therefore, he didn't bring eternal peace. No, Shlomo actually eliminated almost all the enemies. But the fact that it was temporary shows that it left something to be completed.
I think that Myra brings down in the whole Indian that he didn't actually hate the thing. He just kind of pushed it away and Kol Yisrael Yishal Peh, he also brings that.
Okay, here he says other than that. Va'inyan, so how does it work on the nitzotzos? How does it affect, what's the difference of the effect on the sparks inside of the world from the 6th and the 7th aliyah? Va'inyan, the yeshod de nukva, who is kashrus ha-makabel, malchus ba-mashpiyah zah. Little Kabbalah language, but we'll sort it out. It's not a problem. First of all, what is yesod? Because he's just changing the language. It's the same thing we were just talking about. What is yesod de nukva? Right, yesod of malchus. We were just talking about this level. Right? There's 10. Who's singing? Hold off on that one. There's 10 spheros in malchus, right? Malchus, there's chokhmah of malchus, bina of malchus, etc., etc. There's yesod of malchus. We just talked about it. And we said that level gets affected when you go to the 6th level of aliyah, right? Is everyone on the same page here? Mm-hmm. Okay, so yesod of nukva, what is its inyan? What is the definition of yesod de nukva, of the yesod of malchus? So as is all levels of yesod, it's hiskashrus hamakabel ba'amashpiyah. Yesod, which represents basically the genitalia, basically, for lack of a better word, it is that part of the body, its inyan is to join together the man and the woman. The yesod represents basically connection. Hiskashrus of the makabel, of the receiver of malchus, with the mashpiyah, zal. That's what the sphere of yesod does spiritually and physically. Okay, so in other words, the sphere of yesod, in other words, like the Alter Rebbe starts defining the midos, he says basically chesed, you just want to give, and gevur, you have to contract yourself because the giving is not going to be healthy if you give too much, and then Tiferes is that you find the right balance of giving, etc., etc. And he goes to Yesod, and he basically says Yesod is like the intense desire of the mashpia to connect with the makabel. In other words, it's that joining, because even if you have all the right thing to give, if you're not like passionate about caring that the person you're talking to receives the information, he's not going to receive anything. Like a father, if he's not, and the more excited he says, like the mushal of procreation, he says the more excited you are, the more seed is produced, and therefore the more chance that there's going to be a child here, right? It's basically like the excitement and the intensity of bonding with the mashpia and the makabel. So the yesod of the makabel is the interest on the side of the makabel to join with the mashpia. The yesod of the mashpia is the interest on the side of the mashpia to join with the makabel. They both need to like have a certain interest of their yesod to come and unite in order for the hashpah to be given over. This is the inyan of yesod of every sphera, and particularly yesod of malchus is the yesod of the receiver to join, and the interest on the part of the receiver to join with the mashpia. That's its inyan. That's the definition of yesod of nukva. What is malchus? The malchus, right? That's what the identity of malchus, who b'derech klal, what's called koach hapoel shebenifal, right? We call this the power of the doer in the deed. In other words, like take a rock that you throw through the air, right? The fact that it's able to go through the air and not go according to its nature just to sit on the ground is because it has the power of the doer inside the deed. You've transferred your energy of the mashpia, and it's now existing kiviyachol as it is independently inside of the mashpia. Inside of the makabel. Right? That it's carrying, a foreign entity is carrying the power of the mashpia as if it's its own power. It doesn't anymore trace itself back or have any recourse to define its source because it's a flying rock. It's happy on its own. It doesn't need to show or prove that it's got its hashpah from someone else. And that's basically malchus of malchus. The lowest level is the experience that the world runs itself. That there's an energy inside the world, kiviyach, that Hashem like made the object and sent it into the shuk, and it has its own life force that it doesn't require the creator. Okay, you don't have to, it doesn't have to be in a state of denial of the creator. But it is this kind of big idea that it's, you see, before there was the idea of the, let's say yesod is the direct influence of the mashpia into the makabel. It's still like giving over. It's still sort of on the standpoint of the mashpia giving over, and the joining is the main emphasis. Whereas when you get to malchus, the separation is the main emphasis, and the fact that the hashpah has already been released and given over to the side of the makabel. That's malchus of malchus. You get it? So each of these two spheros, yesod and malchus, it's been released into the makabel. In other words, you threw the rock. Your energy is no longer in your arm; it's in the rock, and the rock is flying with its, so to speak, its own power now. Right? That's the power of the doer in the deed. That's what they call that. Koach hapoel benifal. It's like a standard language, that statement. Koach hapoel benifal. It basically means the power of divinity, which is already inside of the thing that he made, so to speak, independent looking. So that's yesod and malchus of malchus. That's the definition. We were talking about the minute ago, just in an abstract way. That's their actual definition. V'lechein, and therefore, b'yamei Shlomo, in the days of Shlomo, shagilu b'malchus hayarak b'dargas hamalchus kamo sheshayach l'zah. Therefore, in the days of Shlomo, where the revelation into malchus, remember we said it, there was malchus elevated to the 6th level, and therefore it was permeated up until what sphera?
Until Atik. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
It went up till Atik, and therefore it was permeated in malchus until what sphera?
Malchus and Malchus?
Yesod.
Yesod of malchus.
Yes.
You getting this, guys? In other words, if it goes, the higher it goes up, the more it gets affected. The higher it goes, the lower the influence is able to reach. So when it went up to Atik, it was able to hit all 9 spheros of malchus were able to be affected by that, but not the 10th. So when you get to the 9th sphere, you're at yeshod. So the yeshod of malchus, i.e. the yeshod of the world is like malchus, was affected, but not below that. So what does that mean tangibly? What's that?
What's below malkus?
Malchus of malchus.
Oh, okay.
Yeshod of malchus was affected, not malchus of malchus.
Oh, okay. So everything was affected except for malchus and malchus.
Except for malchus of malchus. Only in the 7th aliyah will malchus of malchus be affected, which is when you hit the reish de lo yisyada.
And the last one.
I see the thing with the 7, but how does it work with the 9 and the 10?
Because when you go to 6 up, you reach 9 down.
So it's 6 up.
You go 6 up, you reach 9 down.
When you go to the 6th partsuf, you reach all the way down to the 9th sphera
Oh.
of malchus. Right? What are we trying to do? We're trying to affect the world. Right? The world has 10 parts. So the higher the aliyah, the more intensely deep.
9, you reach the 9th, yeah, I saw it.
You reach more and more of the 10 spheres of malchus. But by the time you get to the 6th partsuf of atik, you're able to permeate chokhmah, bina, das, chesed, gevurah, tiferes, netzach, hod, and yesod of malchus. It's like almost completely overwhelmed with godliness. There's only one little part of it that has not been touched, and that's malchus of malchus. Right?
Right.
So now we're going to define what is exactly yesod of malchus and malchus of malchus. Like, what are they? What is their actual... You're talking to me Kabbalah here. What is it? How do we bring this down and make it make sense to us? So we defined those 2 spheros. And now he's saying, therefore, in the days of Shlomo, where the Gilui of Malchus was only Hayarak B'dargas HaMalchus, was only reached the level of Malchus, Kamosh Shayeches Leza, it only reached Malchus as it is associated with Za. Right? It didn't reach Malchus of Malchus, it only reached Yesod of Malchus. Yesod of Malchus is like another name for Za. Because it's like the pinnacle of Zer Anpin.
Ah, okay.
Right? All the emotions are the foundation of them, the yesod of them is yesod. So therefore, that's sometimes we just call yesod Zer Anpin. Oftentimes we call yesod Zer Anpin. So the effect upon Malchus was only the, so to speak, Zer Anpin of Malchus. It was only Malchus as it is related to Zer Anpin. It was not Malchus of Malchus. You get that? Gama Allah danitzotzo shenaf lamata. Therefore, the elevation of the sparks that had fallen and got lodged into the klippas that fell below, haisarak ba'osam anitzotzos. It was only in those sparks sheshayachim largish or eloki that are relevant to feeling a divine light. Let me explain. What was Shlomo able to affect in his day? It said all the nations came to him and so forth. Guess what? Except the ones that didn't. Right? Not every single nation came to Shlomo. Only the nations which had a certain feeling for godliness. Now that feeling for godliness could have been long hidden. And basically they were busy fighting wars and killing each other and not feeling godliness. But they had a certain feeling for godliness that should Shlomo come around, it would arouse them. So what is that? What part of the world are they? They're bidiyuk, the yesod of the world. What is the yesod of the world? It's the part of the woman, basically, of the world that is interested in connecting with the man. The yesod of Malchus, we said, is the desire of the world to join with the mashpia. Right? That's what yesod of Malchus is. We just said that a minute ago, if you recall. You remember that? So if the godliness was able to come down and affect that up till there, it means anyone who had a feeling for godliness, who had the sphere of Yesod of Malchus, like sort of their Yesod of Malchus was activated, means anybody that the godliness was able to long for, its source was drawn in by that revelation. Because the revelation hit to a point where it affected the yesod of Malchus. That means anyone who had basically an interest in joining to their mashpia was drawn to it. But someone who had no interest in joining to their mashpia, in other words, they were holding by a level of Malchus, which is like the idea of the separated divinity flung into the rock, which is no longer, it's going in the other direction of the one who threw it. It's no interest in rejoining its divine source. It's completely cut off. That level was not affected by Shlomo's revelation because he only went down to yeshod. He only went down to those who had an interest to connect. You follow that? And that's why he did not completely refine the world. There were certain sparks that he didn't get to because there were sparks that were so low. They didn't even have any interest whatsoever to connect with divinity. It was like pure klippas that were like literally had been disconnected from their source to a point they had no interest anymore. You know? Most people are rebelling against Hashem because they're sad, they were wrong. But if you like sort of open them up a little bit, they'll come back. You know what I mean? If you can like speak their language, they're looking for connection. Most people are looking for connection. Very few people are like cold as a rock. They're just on their own individual, do not want to have any connection with anything at all. They want to be a klippa and that's their like life. He wasn't able to get to those because they don't have their yeshod was not, even if you hit their yeshod, it didn't touch them. They fell lower than yeshod.
There's no stop them?
Not by Shlomo's level, there's not.
Okay.
Because he's still dealing with light. He was still dealing with an Indian of Giloi. So he was able to reach anything that was shaykh to Giloi. But not things that were totally not shaykh to Giloi.
Right.
They did not interested in any Giloi. Like, on the contrary, they were opposed to the revelation of Hashem in a big way.
So when Mashiach comes, all those clippers will just...
So that's what the Eresha de lo Yisyada is going to be able to affect. That's what he says in the next line. La'asid lavo, in the future, Shagilu yegam bedargas ha-malchus, where the revelation will affect even malchus of malchus, the goof. Right, what are we talking about here? The goof. In other words, even the lowest level of your soul, it still would be excited if you spoke godliness to it. But your bones, your flesh, what do they know from godliness? They're inanimate objects. They happen to be godliness also. They just don't know that and they're not interested in being told that. They're just pashit flesh, rocks. Right? So to them, you're going to like woo them with all the most beautiful discourses of Chassidus. They're not going to be interested necessarily. Maybe Chassidus, yeah. But they're not going to be interested. And so in the future, however, when there'll be such an unbridled revelation of the Reish de lo Yisyada, the third head, and that will therefore, since it goes so high to the seventh Aliyah, it will also go so down to the 10th Sphira, Malchus of Malchus. So lasid lavo shagilu yegam bedargas ha-malchus, it will also reach Malchus kamo shehi b'bi'ah, as Malchus goes into bi'ah. That's the exact definition of koach ha-poel benifal. When Malchus leaves Atzilus, and it actually exits the divine world, and it goes into the lower worlds to enliven them. That's akin to the power inside of the rock. Va'ad lekoach ha-poel shebenifal, it goes down to bi'ah, all the way through Bria, Yitzira, Asiya, all the way down to the power of the doer in the deed, like we were talking about. That's Malchus of Malchus. Gam anitzotzo shenisrachaku b'Malchus. Therefore, even the sparks that distance themselves from Malchus, as far as possible, shelechein ein shaychim mitzaratzmam largish or eluki. Therefore, on their own, they're not even relevant to experience any divine light. And even those sparks that distance themselves kol kach so much, ad shehem atzmam naisu kamo ra, that the spark itself became evil. We learned about this in another place, like the divine spark can actually become evil. It's called like chaticha naisa nevela. We have a certain smicha students here, but the idea of chaticha naisa nevela is that ultimately you can take, we have a few. It's an Indian kashrus basically, where you can take it so that if, let's say you have a drop of milk going into a fleshik pot that has 60 times of meat as opposed to milk, right? So if it drops into the pot, it becomes nullified. You can eat the whole pot, no problem. But then you have a situation where if there's a piece of meat sticking out of the top of the pot a little bit, right? Or it's bichlal sitting on another piece and it's like open to, it's not like really drowned up in the sauce or anything, and you drop a piece of meat just on that one piece, then not only does it not get nullified with everything else in the pot, that piece itself becomes treif, and it becomes that now you need 60 times of meat in the pot against that whole piece, not just against the drop of milk. That which could have been nullified and could have been godly itself becomes a massive klippa that needs to be nullified in a bigger mixture. And this happens with godly sparks. It's a really weird thing that the Rabbi describes in another mimer that we learned together actually back in the day. But it's this notion that godliness can become so concealed that it's not just godliness concealed inside of a klippa anymore. The godliness itself becomes a klippa and a ferocious one, and it becomes like something that is the stuff that tests are made of. The only way the way that expresses itself is that how is that godly then? It's like mamish a wicked man to the core, because it's godly because you can still get the spark out of him, so to speak, by standing up to him. And no, it's not like a normal way that you can access the spark, that you sort of make a bracha on it and eat it and sort of refine it, separate the good from bad. The only way to separate the good from the bad here is to basically stand up to it, and it's like gimel klippas atameus, right? The 3 impure levels of klippa. There's no way to elevate it. The only thing you can do is sort of like beat its test that it's standing before you. Which means that the thing itself has now become, the godliness itself has become so magusham that it became the opposite of godliness. So there's 2 levels of klippa. One is that the godliness is just hiding inside of the shell, and one is that it becomes the shell. And even these levels of godliness, which became so distant from Elokus, that they themselves become, as it were, Ra, Gam hem yis'alu v'yuchelu b'kedusha. Even they, when the lo yisiyada comes out, even they will become included in kedusha.
Well, can you say again the little thing about the klippos and the meat?
The cooking, like
the idea is that the whole point we're trying to get to is the chaticha naisa nevela. What was just a piece of kosher meat, which theoretically could have participated in the nullification of klippa, that piece itself becomes a big giant klippa. It turns, because the drop of milk falls onto it, and it itself does not have 60 times against the drop.
Does it have to fight?
That specific piece of meat.
Yeah, now you're in a big problem, because instead of needing 60 times of meat against 1 drop of milk, you need 60 times of meat against that whole piece of chicken.
Okay, but
so it's basically created a monster, is what we're saying.
If it's like a little piece of meat and only the meat, or is it the whole dish? Like it's
no, there's enough in a dish to nullify like 60 times. That drop.
So that piece of meat.
But the Hebrew was, the piece was sticking out of the bowl, wasn't inside that bowl.
Right.
So when that little drop hits it, it doesn't have any of its own power to fight that little drop. It doesn't have 60 times it. Right. So it becomes an Isra of its own. It becomes like a whole new clip.
So you cannot just take it out?
No, because it was still touching the pot.
So the whole pot becomes...
No, so now the pot needs 60 times for that piece.
So you need 60 times
against the piece instead of the drop.
The whole piece becomes like
the piece became the milk, which was so to speak the prohibition that needed to be nullified. Now becomes a whole piece of chicken.
Right.
So now the point, but forgetting about the law technically in the kashrus, the point that we're bringing out from here, that the Rabbi brought out, is that something which was ultimately there to nullify klippa itself becomes klippa. Right? It's and what we're saying here is that the godly spark, which is so supposed to be like divinity, it itself becomes the great enemy. Right? The divine light not only turns into sort of like a curtain, which makes, it not only is sort of hidden by a curtain where you can't see the divine light. Like a normal thing, you don't see like every cow walking on the road. It's not a Sefer Torah because it's hiding behind a klippa of the cow. Right, of the worldliness. You follow me? So there is a Sefer Torah inside that cow, but it requires a little tikkun to get it to come out. But a pig, it doesn't work like that. The divinity, which is, it's not just hiding inside of the skin of the cow, it becomes something, it like manifests itself as something purely evil. And that's what we're saying, is that even levels of divinity which became evil, they went down this hishtalshlus so low, they actually not only are hiding inside of the worldliness, they become evil elements. They also will get affected by the Reisha de lo Yisiyada and be turned over by it.
How is that with the
pig will become kosher
meat thing again? Like, how
Leave it alone, the meat. How about that? Don't eat it.
Vegetarian.
The point over there we're just trying to say is that the peace becomes treif. That's basically all you have to remember.
Yeah.
The peace is the godly divine spark, and it becomes treif. It's no longer a divine spark. It's now a klippa. V'zeh.
And the pig becomes kosher.
Ultimately, when the Mashiach level will come,
Yeah.
because it's able to affect divinity which has become totally disconnected. That's the point.
Right.
Divinity which has no ability nor interest to reconnect to God. Even it will reach that. And how can that be possible? Because you're dealing with a level of godliness which is no longer associated with light. No longer associated with that there has to be some revealed godliness in order to be godliness. You're getting to the essence, where the essence is not limited to the fact that it can only bring godliness into place where there's light. It can also bring godliness to places where there's dark. Because everything's godliness at that level. And this, that the physicality at that time will be in a perfect state of oneness. It's not only because then Yizgala Koach Eloki Shebo. It's not only because it will reveal the godly power inside of it, Shemahave also me'ayin liyesh, which is bring it into being from something to nothing. In other words, it's not just because there's a divine spark which is trapped in there, which is going to be released, which is basically what we were saying, Giloi Koach HaPol Shebenifal. The divine spark, which is trapped in there, which needs to be released, is like the flying rock. In other words, the flying rock will not only, this is in other words, what we're saying is like this, the flying rock will come to realize the power which is making it fly is God. It's not just like, I'm cruising through the air. I'm cruising through the air because there's a divine power in me. That's a high level, but it's not even the highest level that he's talking about that. Because that's still a divine thing empowering me, but there's still a divinity and a me. And I'm just recognizing that the thing which is enlivening me is God. It's not just my own. So the power of the doer in the deed, for sure that will get lifted up with this elevation. But even the deed itself, it was the rock, not the power inside the rock, not the enlivening force of God in the rock, but the actual experience of the physicality, the ultimate klippa in which everything is sitting in, even that will be in a state of total oneness. Because again, even the power of the doer inside the deed is still somewhat related to the giver, the poel, the mashpia. It's just that at a certain level, the mashpia's light goes inside of the makabel and it can become misunderstood, and the makabel can think that it's its own light. So that's already a level which has to be fixed, yes. But there's a deeper level than that. There's the actual makabel. Not that the makabel thinks that the life force is its own. That's one problem. But then there's the fact that it just has this thing that the life force is sitting inside of, the actual gashmias of the makabel. That too will be elevated by this level. It's a little bit of a complicated topic. I hope you understand. If not, you can ask questions. Now would be a good time. But everyone follows this more or less?
Yeah.
Yeah?
No, I'm kind of confused.
So up until now, we introduced a new level, basically, real quick, like without telling anybody. Up until now, we were saying that there's the yeshod of malkus, which is those things which have an interest in divinity, and they were affected by the days of Shlomo. Then there's malkus sheba malkus, which is what we call the power of the doer in the deed. And those were not affected in the days of Shlomo. And what is the power of the doer in the deed? It's the feeling that the life force inside of the creation is its own, that it exists independently. Right? And that's malchus of malchus. But now we're saying that there's actually a lower stage than that. Because even malchus of malchus, it is godly, it is a godly spark. It's just that the godly spark is trapped inside of an entity that thinks that it's not a godly spark, it's my own life force. In other words, you're alive. You think, and I think, that we're alive, that our life is just like my physical human life. It's what we don't realize is that it's not our physical human life. It is divinity. The life that you experience as Baruch Binyamin and Shalom is mamish God's life force. There's no human life force. It doesn't exist. There's no animal life force, no plant life force. It's divine life force. It's just when it comes into a physical place. This is the weird thing about the flying rock, is that it thinks that it's like flying with its own powers. Where a flying rock, it's obvious that it's not. That's why it's the example used. But the truth is that we think that our life force is our own. So that's called the power of the doer in the deed. That will for sure be taken care of. We'll come to the realization that it's divine life force. But further than that, it's the actual goof, which is being enlivened by that life force. Even it will have an elevation. And that's a level we didn't even talk about. That's lower than malkus sheba malkus. Because malkus sheba malkus is still, it's not really the goof as it comes out. It's the life of the goof. But the actual physical goof, which is what we said before, is like pure ra. It's like when the nitzutz no longer is just hiding inside of something and pretending to be its own life force. It actually becomes an entity other than godliness. It comes the physical. Even that will be elevated in the time of Mashiach.
Like your body will be holy and your soul.
Are we like flying away by the time here? Not really. Let me just finish this.
I just have to go to the doctor, that's all.
All right, last line. Which is,
it worked.
but Tam L'Kol Zeh, the reason for all this, as it says, as we said above in the Maimer, Ki Az Tiyam Shachas Pnimius Atik. Then there will be a revelation of Pnimius Atik, which is Ein Sof Shebereish Shebelei Yisrael. It's the Ein Sof inside the unknowable head. L'chein Yeh Az Hagilui Gam B'Malkus Sheba Malkus. Therefore the revelation will get all the way down to Malkus of Malkus. And here's the point: V'Yasera is that even more Gam Lamata Ba'olam Hazeh Agashmi, even into the actual physical kelim, which is called Ra. B'nitzotzos HaKedosha Sheb'Devarim HaGashmim, which is, again, respectively, Malkus of Malkus is the holy sparks inside the physical thing. And then Gam HaNitzotzos Nisrachaku, and even the sparks that get so distant, Gam B'Devarim HaGashmim Atu, even into the actual physicality itself, the bones. Your flesh will see God. Not just the life force in your flesh will see God. Your actual flesh will see God.
If that's not malchus of malchus, then what is it?
It's basically what it's the thing malchus of malchus is sitting in. Malchus of malchus is your perception that your life force is your own. That's already the power of the doer in the deed. You think it's yours, but that's still sitting inside of a body. That experience of life. So why is it so far away? Because you literally think it's your own life. So that's already malchus of malchus. But what is it